You're listening to The Heart of Now, honest conversations about living free from suffering, hosted by Monica Rose. Welcome everyone to the latest episode of The Heart of Now. I wanted to take a moment to thank our former co-host Elizabeth Rayner, who's moving on to a new project. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your brilliance and your hard work and dedication on this journey we had together. I'm wishing you all the best. I am extremely excited today to be here with Miranda MacPherson. She is an interfaith minister, spiritual teacher, and author who shares a feminine approach to surrender and non-dual realization based on the practice that she calls Ego Relaxation. I can't wait to get into this with her. Her wisdom and palpable transmission invites others to become more graceful human beings through inquiry, meditation, devotion, and psychological integration. Grounded in extensive study of the world's wisdom traditions, inspired by Sri Ramana Maharshi, which I also have been inspired by throughout my life, A Course in Miracles, and the Diamond Approach, Miranda has been guiding others into direct experience of the sacred for 30 years. Her books include The Way of Grace, The Transforming Power of Ego Relaxation, Boundless Love, and Meditations on Boundless Love. Welcome, Miranda. So lovely to be with you.
Thank you so much, Monica. It's great to be here with you too.
There's so much I want to talk to you about today and share with our listeners, because I feel like you have deep, deep wisdom. And I'd love to just start with your journey. What's been the most catalytic moment of your self-discovery?
Wow. Well, my journey began when I was a child, as I think it does for many people. And the older I get, the more I can look back and see the seeds of, what my teachings and practice and what I share with people has become were already there in my childhood, in that I was always sort of intuitively knowing that there was much more to life than what was being presented and talked about, and that I was yearning for a deeper conversation about those things that wasn't very available. What didn't make sense to me as a young person was, why is it that people are unkind to each other? Why do they have to be so mean? It didn't make sense to me when I encountered a lack of loving kindness, lack of compassion, and all those sorts of things. And I really struggled with that. Therefore, I struggled with depression as a young person. And now when I look back on that, it was very clear that that was really a spiritual crisis. And within that, when I was 13, in my most difficult moment, I was kind of cracked open, I think, by surrender by exhaustion to a state that I would now call boundless love, which is not just a lot of love, but the non-duality of love, where we see that love is a deeper reality than the reality of separation and fear and hatred and unkindness, and that our nature is that love, and that it is one and the same as what we might think of or call God, and that that's a deeper reality than all that goes on in this world. And at that time, I would say that was my first awakening. And I felt so profoundly plugged into reality with a capital R, and it really put me on the spiritual path, and began a very passionate study that began as a teenager into some of the Eastern mystics. It's just what I happened upon, Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Ananda Mayima, and Gurdjieff. I was reading all that when I was a teenager.
Amazing.
And then learning, like, where can I learn to meditate? And, this is in Perth, Western Australia, which was 20 years behind everywhere else at the time. And so I was always really on fire to live from that depth that I knew was more real than the stumblings in separation and fear and anger and all of that. So, one thing led to another, and I entered in seminary training in my 20s. And as soon as, even before I was ordained, my then teacher, whose name was Rabbi Joseph Gelberman, who was the originator of the whole concept of interfaith seminary, just asked me to start the interfaith seminary in England, which I did. And I consider that really a big part of my own training as a teacher. I was in at the deep end, make a ton of mistakes, get supervision, figure out how to do it in a better way. It was kind of coming to the end of that 10 years as spiritual director of this interfaith seminary that I began to feel I was getting a little stale. And the opportunity was afforded to me to go on pilgrimage to India. I'd been on pilgrimage to India many times before and always loved it. But I'd never been to the ashram of Sri Ramana Maharshi before. And I didn't have any particular special connection with Ramana at the time, but I had deep respect, and I was kind of glad just to be able to go somewhere where it was mostly silent. That's what I felt like I wanted. And one day when I was sitting in the cave that was once the home that he lived in for 15 years, I was really stopped by a very profound transmission that is hard to really describe in an ordinary way, but it spoke and reverberated through me with like a thunderous power. Be nothing, do nothing, get nothing, become nothing, seek for nothing, relinquish nothing, be as you are, rest in God. And it stopped my mind very profoundly. I don't remember how long I was in the cave. All I know is that it felt like everything stopped. What I thought of as myself wasn't there anymore. All my concepts of God were intercepted. I had a lot of them being an interfaith minister. Everything changed. It was really a before and after kind of moment in my life.
How profound.
Yeah, really it was. And all I remember is it's as if I died, but I was still here.
Amazing.
Yeah. And then, of course, we all kind of hear stories like this and we think, oh, great, done. But it's not like that. What I want to emphasize, especially for listeners, because we can all have big moments and they really do come mysteriously by grace. I love that saying in the Zen tradition that enlightenment is a divine accident, but spiritual practice makes one more accident prone. Right. So,
Yeah.
yes, I had a significant, good 20 years of spiritual practice under my belt before that happened, which I'm sure had something to do with why I was even there, why I was drawn there, why there was an openness for that to happen. And yet I didn't make it happen. I cannot lay any claim or credit to this happening. Happens by grace.
I love that you said it took 20 years because I feel like so many people hear these stories of these profound awakenings and they think, well, why hasn't it happened to me?
Oh,
They're
totally.
just waiting, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. And I think that's partly why I'm saying this and saying we do need to show up for our spiritual practice and do our best and work through crunchy material and deal with the chatter in our mind and unhook from our superego and its judgment and work through our psychological issues. And I wouldn't say that just because that awakening happened that I'm a done deal. I reject that notion. So what I want to also say before we go on to the next kind of question or what have you is that it was what happened after that moment that was what I realized. All of my years of spiritual practice were really for preparation of what happened afterwards, where I was asked to let go of all the familiar supports for my prior identity. And that is not an easy thing, no matter who you are.
No.
Right? So what happened without me trying to make it happen was there wasn't a single area of my life where I wasn't asked to let go of it. And that came right down not only to all my work that I was very identified with and was very beautiful, and it's still going today in England, but just guided by others. My marriage at the time, that was a good marriage, and it came to an end. The country that I called home, so really I was asked for a letting go, a death of all the things that had been supports to my familiar identity and way of knowing myself.
The deepest
And
surrender, it sounds
deep,
like. You,
deep, complete, multi-dimensional surrender. And I realized, yeah, that's what the spiritual practice was for.
mm,
Practice and preparation, so that when that was what was asked, I could say, yes, okay. And that doesn't mean that a person doesn't go through grief about that, or moments where that's challenging. There were moments where that was very challenging and very vulnerable, but it was grace that the spiritual practice prior to this had happened, so that I could understand the reason and the value for, while we might be asked to let go of things we're attached to that are no longer serving, we still need to be compassionate with ourselves in the entirety of the process.
yes, it's such a vulnerable place to surrender that.
Profoundly vulnerable, yes. And what I learned was that I had to learn to be with a feeling, a depth of vulnerability that at that time felt like having no skin.
Mm, yeah.
And it changed so that the vulnerability at a certain point just became easier, became more just openness, and it didn't have the edge of vulnerability anymore. But it takes time for our nervous system, our consciousness, to adapt and adjust to deeper spiritual states, and time for them to be able to integrate.
Hmm.
And I was
Hmm.
really grateful for the knowledge about that awakenings can happen in a split second, and they happen by grace. But integration does take time and is a much more delicate, long-term, nuanced process.
For sure.
And
For
that
sure.
integration is crucial, because if it doesn't get integrated, it tends to be a bit of a half-baked awakening. And I don't know whether that's so useful.
Yeah, because that's so fascinating. I haven't heard of that before, a half-baked awakening. What do you think happens to people in that state?
Well, it can be tricky, because I think there can be confusions, what I call level confusion. We might have realized, for example, the realization I had was I'm absolutely nothing, right?
Mhm.
And the beauty of that was that prior to that awakening, I would say that the thing I stumbled upon or struggled with the most was an egoic feeling of I'm nothing, meaning lacking in value, not good
Yes.
enough, which
Yes,
I've
which
come to see that's what most people are actually stumbling upon,
I think so, especially
right?
in Western culture.
Yeah, because the default, the state of ego is a state of lack, deficiency. Of course, ego is disconnected from the totality of who and what we really are, the ground of reality. And so, of course, we feel a sense of personal lack. And they usually have a story about that that
Hmm.
relates to our history, that we play out in our relationships, in our work, and overcompensate for, and et cetera, et cetera. But for me, the joy was, oh, be nothing.
Mm.
Wow.
So
Like,
freeing.
yes, it's actually true. My ego is not a real entity.
No, it's not, which is
Right.
so, once you realize that, you go, who have I been defending this whole time?
Precisely. And therefore, there was a way, what that led me to was such an important understanding in the integration process. Wow, I don't have to feel bad about the way my ego got structured into a personality and the kind of tendencies it has. It's about forgiving, understanding, and relaxing that. And that's the freedom.
And well,
And
talk about that a little bit more because ego relaxation is such a big part of your work. Can we
so
tap into that a little bit?
sure. So ego relaxation is both a transmission of grace. So that
Mhm.
same transmission that came to me in the cave wasn't just for one human being to have an awakening. It's a transmission that we can all be with. So I often say to my students, when you forget who you are, when you get caught up in your patterns, when you find yourself pushing and pulling, and trying to kind of get things done from the perspective of separate somebodyness, right? Lie on the floor and just come back. Be nothing, do nothing. There is nothing you have to be, There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to get or get to. There's nothing you have to get rid of. There's nothing you have to become. The only thing that is required of you is just be here now. And in this now, you are within and part of God, and you can rest there. You can take refuge in any moment. It's like hitting the transmission. That's the transmission of ego relaxation. It's like hitting the reset button and being restored to your original default factory setting of
And what you're
natural
talking about is so
peace.
available so quickly. That's
It
what I
can
love
be.
about it.
It can be. That's why I've created this as a little 8-minute free download on my website with Ramana Maharshi's beautiful face. So anyone can go there. I think it's on Insight Timer too. And you can just receive me just giving you the transmission as a way to just reset. So that's the transmission of ego relaxation.
Okay.
But ego relaxation is also a practice. It's a how, right? So in relationship to any tendency that we might notice about ourselves, right? We might notice there's a tendency to kind of tense up and be anxious and fearful. And that might have some history on it, but it might also just be some personality structures just have more anxiety in them than others. Some have more quick to anger, get frustrated very easily and want to blame somebody. Some have more kind of control, needing to be controlling. I mean, we've all got all of that.
I was going to say, I think I have all three of those.
We've got all three of them, but in different proportions.
Yes.
And if you look at things through the Enneagram lens or any other system, there's certain explanations for why some personality structures have this feature more than that, so they go there first. But I think, so ego relaxation asks us not to try to annihilate our ego. It doesn't view surrender as pushing past our ego or merely transcending to the Om Cafe, which those of us who've been around for a while kind of have seen doesn't actually work very well.
No, I was going to say, I don't think I've ever been able to enter, but
a lot of people are still thinking that that's what they have to do, have to annihilate their ego. Well, who thinks they need to annihilate what? Ego can't.
There you go.
Right. Ego can't be in charge of the process of surrender. Otherwise, it's not going to be any surrender.
No.
And ego can't even do surrender. All your ego structure knows how to do is repeat the patterns of the past plus trying harder. The patterns of the past were all formed in all of us between the ages of 0 and 6. So it's akin to putting a 5-year-old in charge of your life and just telling that 5-year-old, try harder. Well, that's never going to be very elegant, is it?
No.
Right. It's always going to be limited. But usually there's so many layers, and there's usually a shame layer. I should be able to do it differently, be conscious and be aware and not stumble in this ego pattern of anxiety or insecurity or anger. Well, who says? And so ego relaxation is just noticing the mechanisms of ego. Judgment, for example. What if we just relax that, like we learn in Shavasana at the end of a yoga class, to bring our attention to places in our body that are tense, and not say you shouldn't be tense, not try to push the tension away, but just to see if it can melt. And usually when we bring a loving, attentive awareness to something without a judgment that it should or shouldn't be the way it is, it usually just melts very naturally without a pushing. I like to think of it as if, okay, your ego is like a hard, dense block of ice, right? Two things about that hard, dense block of ice. Number one, we know that the fundamental substance of ice is water, even though when it's frozen, it looks and behaves very differently than when it's thawed. When water is frozen, it's dense, it's opaque, it doesn't move very well, it's kind of clunky, you can't see through it, it's not very hydrating. But when you take that block of ice into the backyard and you let the warmth of the sun's rays touch that ice, transformation happens in a very graceful, effortless, very natural way. And so when you and I bring loving awareness to wherever we find ourselves, even in an ego pattern, even we find ourselves, wanting to blame our husband, annoyed that he's doing the things he's doing, or our kid again, and we want to just sort of like let rip on them or tell them how they should be, even though we might know that usually doesn't produce a very good response,
Definitely not.
right? Nevertheless, if we be aware, oh, I'm feeling this anger, I'm feeling this resentment. If we just stop and, okay, what if I just be here, do nothing, feel that, meet that with loving awareness, be interested in what's really driving that, go deeper. Oh, how come I'm really upset? What's this really about? And we be with that with no judgment. And so the practice of ego relaxation is essentially opening, softening, allowing our direct experience exactly as it is, even if it's an egoic experience. That doesn't mean that we act out our egoic experience, but we become more intimate with it in a undefended, loving, compassionate way. We're not trying to soothe ourselves, because that on another level is also a doing. Stay present in our body in that moment, open, soften, and allow our experience to unfold like the warmth of the sun touching that density of the ice. And what happens? Fences melt, and we get more in touch with what's really true, and it brings a grace forth. And the grace that comes forth as we be present, open, and undefended with our direct experience is it takes us to a deeper truth that has insight, or brings more awareness or understanding, or it brings an essential quality online. Maybe it brings compassion alive for ourselves or for another, or it brings a kind of a curiosity to find out more about what's really going on in the relational field. Or maybe it just brings us back to kind of a peacefulness where we just drop it. It'll be different and unique each time. But what happens is that we become less fixed and dense. Our consciousness drops down into its more essential nature that is akin to the water, which is hydrating, it's transparent, it's life-giving, it flows, it's not fixed, it's fresh, it's here, it's now. So ego relaxation shows us how to relax, how to work with and relax our ego tendencies. It also teaches us how to journey with any part of experience, because what we start to see is that wherever we happen to be in any given moment is the gate that it might actually open up to a whole other dimension of possibility. So I teach ego relaxation not only in the form of a meditation, but in the form of very specific bodies of inquiry questions that take people on a journey, and that help them journey both through clarification of their ego issues, their stumbling blocks, and help people journey deeper into consciousness through wherever they happen to be and whatever their most pressing questions are. But the key to it is non-manipulation, non-judgment, not ego is bad. That's just not the case. Ego, like ice, is still fundamentally water. So even your ego structure, even though you might want it to be different, you might find certain parts of your ego frustrating and you wish it weren't there, it's still fundamentally holy, right?
Yeah, it comes from a loving place,
All parts of
ultimately.
our consciousness, everything is part of God. There's nothing else.
And that's something that we could talk about for an hour,
Sure,
just
we
that
could.
in itself.
Sure. But having that framework is really profound, because it gives us what we need to not demonize, to understand and work constructively with ourselves, with our humanity, and with others' humanity, and to understand and learn how to navigate some of the really difficult, crunchy, egoic stuff in our collective sphere right now, and to
Yes,
learn
and that's kind of the next question too,
and learn
is
how to
how do
navigate it with clarity and wisdom.
so how does humanity solve the challenges we're currently facing? Because we're talking about the work we're doing individually to work
Yeah.
with ourselves and relax into who we are. And how do you apply that collectively? Like what do you think of that?
Well, I think a lot about that. And right
Hmm.
now, a big part of my focus is on what does spiritual practice have to offer in the
Hmm.
face of what some are calling the meta crisis or the big crisis.
Yeah.
And I think the answer to that question, quite simply, is it has everything to offer to the meta crisis, because the root of the meta crisis is the same root human beings have been dealing with all along, which is too many of us who are asleep, too many of us whose orientation in life is just to become a bigger, beefier, more successful ego living in a penthouse in hell.
Yes. Yeah.
You and I know, and most of the listeners probably know, well, that's suffering. It might look interesting and fun to have more status, more money, more influence, to be an influencer, but it's not going to give you inner peace or happiness.
It's
It never,
empty, actually,
it's very,
unfortunately.
very empty.
Yeah.
And I mean, social studies have proven that over about $100,000 a year, there's no measurable difference in the quantity of one's happiness than someone who's a billionaire.
I know if you have the basic needs met.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so so what do
And
we
I've lived
do?
that myself. I've
Oh,
been in different parts of my journey. There have been times where there's been a lot more money and times where there's been very little. And it's very clear in my own experience for myself. I've really answered that question, that more money and more things does not really move the needle in
it
terms of
doesn't.
what we
I've been there
all really
too. I
want.
I tried that. I experimented with that as well, and
Yeah.
realized you can be just more at more peace in a trailer,
Yeah. Well, I
potentially.
think, it depends. Different people need to pay attention, but I think it's an important thing to say. But I also think that, those of us on a spiritual path have a very important role to play right now, because in this time where we're dealing with multiple existential challenges that I think we're going to be dealing with more of as a human family, because climate change is likely to bring more challenges, and that's likely to make more people have to migrate from their home, which, as we've seen, is very provocative to some folks who feel threatened by difference and change. And we all know that egos struggle with change, right? Egos don't want to change. Egos are always like, let me hold on to what I know and what I have. And so, what spiritual practice really can help us with, it really all comes down to surrender, befriending mystery, befriending change, learning how to find inner peace and love that's independent of the externals, learning how to take a deeper seat in that within which is never rocked and doesn't change, so that we can be flexible and open to constructive change. These
Mhm.
are all things that spiritual practices give us. They help us to become more authentically stable inside, and they help us to become more grounded in the fact that there's a goodness that's here, even though we're not in control. Even though none of us know how long we've got on this earth, none of us get to say when and how we're going to have to adapt to changes. We are not in that much control. Spiritual practice helps us to befriend the fact of very little control,
Yes.
that we are not in charge, that we never have been. So it confronts all these fundamental delusions of ego and the upset of ego that was always basically got a lot of inner conflict. And then
Yes.
projecting that lack of peace and inner conflict out into the environment in aggressive ways. And so I think we have a role to play of becoming more stable and deeper, so that our quality of being becomes like a beautiful big old tree that provides shade and shelter for other beings to rest in, And I know that that's true, in that so many times just out and about in my life, often when I've been on an airplane and there's someone sitting next to me and they ask me what I do, and
Mm.
I usually don't give away very much. I just say I'm a teacher, and I let them presume whatever they want to unless they want to ask anything further. But I often out and about in the world, people say, "Oh, I feel so calm around you." They comment on that. And I'm sure that that happens to you too. You know, people just notice that, and they feel, oh, their nervous system settles around you.
There's a
Well, I
level of
think,
safety sometimes. I feel that people who are really amazingly in tune with who they are inside,
yeah,
they give that to others. I see it happen.
because we are all naturally transmitting
Mhm.
all the time. And we don't necessarily, it's transmission isn't something you try to do, but we are all radiating from wherever we are abiding in our consciousness. And that radiation, that transmission, could be having an absolutely exquisite, beautiful impact. It might be, you might be radiating love and peace and kindness, right? Joy, empathy, strength, trust. Or you can be radiating fear and hate and self centeredness and I don't give a whatever,
I know, which
right?
also just self perpetuates in others. So it's
Yeah,
either offering trusting what is or offering not trusting at all. And then,
right. And the impact on others is pretty powerful.
mhm.
Whether you are even aware of that or not, it's still having a powerful effect. So all of us are either giving off a beautiful fragrance or a very bad smell,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
And
Yeah.
so hopefully that inspires us to do what we can with our practice, to keep coming to our practices with motivation and sincerity, remembering it does make a difference. And we can make a difference, even though it might seem to be a drop in the ocean. But I think what it also gives us is the capacity to be wise in
Mm.
response to a lot of what's going on right now. And here in America, we're dealing with the lead up to a very important election. And it is important to be wise and discriminating in what we participate in the kind of conversations we have with others, in taking action and voting according to our conscience, and doing what we can to invite others to think deeply and to be able to discriminate falsity from propaganda.
It's a huge time right now of what's true
Very
reality.
huge.
What is
Right.
true reality?
And to be able to think critically and not be hoodwinked by propaganda. And I think in this age, not just with the elections, but in the social media age,
Oh, AI is even making it more
a lot.
difficult to know.
Right. And so, again, spiritual practice has a very important role to play in helping us be able to feel and discriminate truth from delusion, or and when we really start to become intimate with deeper truth, there's a deep part within us that can feel what's true. It's like the heart can feel it, the heart that we can smell it, and we can also use our minds in a beautiful and noble way to go, what's the source of this? Who's funding it? Is this a trustworthy source or not? How can I discriminate that?
Inquiry, really.
Inquiry, exactly. And so that requires a love of the truth. It requires paying attention. It's a process of becoming more intimate with deeper truth and and having some reference point to be able to apply that in ordinary life situations. And also to be patient and also to accept that being human means we're always in a learning curve.
Oh, for sure. It never stops. And actually, you keep speaking to spiritual practice, Miranda, and I'm thinking in my head, spiritual practice is such a big word. What does that mean for people? And I know you've developed this beautiful deck that has spiritual practice in it. What do you think of playing a little bit and sharing
Sure.
it and
Yeah.
having a small practice right now that people can
Beautiful.
access?
Yeah. Well, I want to categorize before we pull a card is just to say that I'm speaking now from my grounding as an interfaith minister and my deep respect for the fact that there are many paths, many spiritual paths that have stood the test of time for very good reason because they work,
Hmm.
because there's truth and clarity and beautiful technology within all the great wisdom traditions, and that there are also newer traditions that have been continuing to evolve because divine being doesn't stop. It keeps bringing forth. And I think that is, to me, that is a manifestation of the intense, boundless love of reality for its own, that there are so many different kinds of practices available to us. And so it's beautiful to know that. I want to say that mostly to the listeners is to, maybe yoga is the practice that is most meaningful for you. Body-based practices are what's most helpful for you now. How wonderful. Come to your mat often. And remember that the context of Hatha yoga is actually part of a greater tradition of Raja Yoga that includes cultivating discrimination, viveka, includes cultivating concentration, includes meditation. So it's a springboard to a much more nuanced process. And for people that may have been raised Christian or Jewish, who might have come from lineages where prayer is a really important part of spiritual practice, prayer is beautiful, and we can say set prayers, or we can just speak to the divine, even if we're not even sure we have a name or face for the divine. We can speak our thank yous to the divine. It's a very natural thing in the morning, or we can ask for help. Even some of the deepest, wisest non-dual traditions I know still include prayer and even petitionary prayer within the framework of a practice. So I want to make that explicit. If we're going through a tough patch with our family member, or we don't know the way with a work project that's really important to us, we can just ask the mystery of life, move me in the direction that best serves, put the words into my mouth that are truly helpful here so that we can come to some deeper understanding of one another and not keep fighting. This is
Beautiful.
beautiful. Or we can turn into a mantra, which is my favorite way to pray these days, where we
Me too.
turn our consciousness into these Sanskrit syllables that are profound transmissions in and of itself, that infuse our consciousness with a deeper reality, act like a very strong broom, clearing all the dust of ego out for a while.
And music
So
too. Music is a huge.
absolutely.
That's what
That
saved me as a child was playing music. That was
totally. I
my
think
spiritual
for
practice.
me too. Yeah, I would, before I found spiritual practice, I was studying classical music. I'd lie on the floor and listen to Bach and I'd cry and I'd just go home. Right? So spiritual practice is very natural. So there are so many ways. And obviously a good line of inquiry, a big part of what I teach, is not something we think about with our mind. It's like we receive a line of inquiry and we let it reverberate and just act upon us and open us and pulsate through us and take us somewhere further where wisdom and deeper understanding comes online. So
Beautiful.
in this grace deck, and obviously meditation, that's obvious. There's so many
Let
methods of
everyone see
meditation.
it. So, Cultivating Grace is the
Yeah.
name of the deck,
Yeah. So
just
this
for those
probably
of you who can't see who are just listening.
So this was one of my COVID sanity projects. I had guidance to engage my creativity more, and I wanted to do something that was deep, practical, and very accessible, knowing that these days a lot of people don't read as much as an author I'd like them to. So I created this card deck, and it comes in this beautiful velvet, yummy pouch.
Mm.
And it's all based on the 4 dimensions of grace. And each dimension of grace has a particular way that it works on us and helps us to let the ice of ego melt back into the fluidity and freedom of our being. And so I'm just going to shuffle the cards right now. And they all have different visuals on them, the suits. And we're going to pull a practice for all of us today who are here and who are listening, and that whatever we pull, it will be most helpful and supportive. Do we need a little drum roll here?
I know. I have a bell. Here.
Okay. So this is fascinating given what we've just spoken about.
Okay.
This is card in the Embodying Grace section.
Okay.
And
Beautiful.
guess what it is? Cherish your practices. And here's what
I
it
love that.
says. It's a question. So this is a line of inquiry. What practices most bring you back to your royal true nature? So this is something for us to consider. What practice most brings you back to your royal true nature? Second question. What do you love about engaging this practice? So the invitation is today, consider what quality of consciousness you are feeding with your attention. Review your daily rhythm of moving through a day. Include in this what you watch, what you read, what you eat, when you stop, as well as any formal spiritual practices like inquiry, prayer, meditation you might engage in. Notice and be curious about the impact of these choices on your quality of being. And motivate yourself to make constructive changes to your daily rhythm from a place of love by just cherishing what helps you most to stay intimate with your true royal nature.
So juicy. So good.
So this comes out of a body of teaching that I give my students, which is about seduce yourself into spiritual practice.
Yeah, for those who find like, how do I make
Yeah.
time or what do I care about?
Yeah.
It's so beautiful just
Well,
to
yeah, because here's the thing. It's like none of us need more should in our life.
know.
Right. So it's about the question of motivation. When you are in touch with what you really love about your practice of yoga, or you're sitting on the meditation cushion, for example, for me, I absolutely love meditation. And I've created a beautiful space with a golden wall, candle, picture of Ramana, some beautiful plants, some photos of my husband and I, some beautiful simple objects, a beautiful comfortable cushion. It's pretty. It's in the quietest spot in the house. And I love that moment of sitting on the cushion, lighting my candle, bowing, and then just disappearing into the silence. I love the feeling of it. I love the peace. I love the intimacy with divine presence that just happens. I love that I just become that. And I love what happens when I move off that cushion and how the radiance of my practice then moves forward into the day. And I love how I respond when I give myself that kind of practice.
It's amazing how you can really start to witness the practice influence on the rest of your life.
Totally.
It's just that beauty of that moment, the time with yourself, with the divine, the
Yeah.
quiet.
And one thing I would say as well is that many people, might have children, and so they don't have the luxury of as much time to do formal practices like the meditation. But there's nothing to stop us having the discipline to keep these little cell phones on their charging devices until at least some kind of practice has happened, whether we go out on our deck with our favorite cup of tea and we just be there and enjoy the bird song and we enjoy that cup of tea and really take that moment to journal or pray or just give thanks for the day. ask for help with anything, there's nothing to stop us putting on a mantra that ignites the love we feel. And then the mantra carries us onto our meditation question.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Yeah, we can
Yes,
have fun with it. And
totally.
and we
And
should have fun with it. We need to. That's part of the nourishment.
there's a playfulness in practice that you can really get in touch with, which I think inspires us to have new possibilities within ourselves. That's
Yeah.
what I notice.
And I also think that that's what I call a more feminine approach.
Mm.
In my 20s, I studied Zen under a Zen master for a while, and I loved it. I loved the discipline and the austerity and facing the wall and everyone in black. And I loved that too. But I noticed that few people that I meet find that so appealing.
It's daunting. I think it can be daunting. It feels like a should sometimes to me.
Well, I think we're just living in times that few of us have the capacity to do it in a more kind of traditional, I would just say more masculine monastic way. And that doesn't mean we can't practice, that we need to find our way of coming back to our true royal nature and noticing what supports that the most for me that is doable.
Yes. And of course, we know that the feminine and the masculine live in all of us.
Totally.
And the divine masculine is compassionate and the divine feminine is creativity. So you can tap in, lean in where it feels
Yeah.
more authentic for you.
Yeah. But I say about the feminine in that I think for so long, up until very recently, most spiritual traditions have been given through the masculine lens only.
Yes, for
And so
sure.
they have been given in a more masculine way, which was great and wonderful, but that's not the only way. And so when I speak of the feminine, I mean, it can be juicy, it can be sensual, it can be
Yes.
fun, it can be playful. We don't usually think of those things when it comes to having a spiritual discipline, but it can be.
Yes.
And that can inspire us to not, I should sit, I should practice, I want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, letting go of the rigidity
Yeah,
of the practice.
right.
Oh my God, this has been so amazing connecting with you and chatting. And we are getting on the time to wrap up, but I want to give our listeners an opportunity to go deeper with you. And I know you have a program coming up.
I do,
And do you want
yeah.
to talk about that a little bit? I'd love to
Sure.
share that.
Yeah. I mean, these days I mostly work with my dedicated students in my ongoing Sangha, but there's two ways that people can work with me if they like what I'm saying. Firstly, I have a new 15-week online program that will be hosted by the Shift Network, and that starts at the end of October. And so for details on that, to just write to info@mirandamacpherson.com and we'll make sure that you receive the details. And that will be a weekly program for 15 weeks. It's called The Way of Grace, which is the title of my book, but it's not necessarily the exact same curriculum. I'm taking people through a beautiful, it'll be a great on-ramp for people that have never worked with me before, and it's deep. And
Great.
the other way is if you just kind of want to receive a teaching once a month, then I have an audio program. It's called the Living Grace Audio Program. And you would go to my website for that. And it's basically you would receive one of my newest audio teachings. It's an hour long and with an inquiry practice.
And remind me your URL so the listeners can hear
Sure.
it.
It's my name, mirandamacpherson.com. And
Okay.
Macpherson is spelled MacPherson, mirandamacpherson.com.
And I'll
And
add it to the show notes too, so people
yeah,
can
and I
find it
really,
that way.
really invite people to go to my website because it's a portal of practices, meditations, mantras, and I've been building it over many years to have a lot of things you can just download and work with. And so I hope that your listeners will go there and find something that supports you, nourishes you, inspires you, and work with it.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Miranda. It's
You're
been
welcome.
really lovely
Pleasure.
being with you today.
Yeah. And just
Um,
every blessing to you,
oh,
Monica, on this podcast and on your listeners, everyone who's been with us today. Just, love and blessings to you and your path and in your life. And, never doubt the value of your inner work. It's immensely important and beautiful for you and for others now.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks so much for being here with us today in the Now. To learn more, visit us on Instagram at the Heart of Now podcast or online at theheartofnow.info.